Ambassador Kira Chen stepped off the transport shuttle and onto the gleaming floors of the Galactic Council space station, with her diplomatic case in hand and a smile, ready for the trade negotiations ahead. The first thing she noticed was how the bustling corridor went completely silent. A tall Vrelian diplomat carrying datapads suddenly stopped mid-stride, and his 4 eyes went wide as moons when he saw her approach. "Earthborn," he whispered, and the words spread through the crowd like wildfire. Within seconds, every alien in the corridor had either pressed themselves against the walls or taken several deliberate steps backward, creating a wide, empty circle around Kira, as if she carried some invisible plague. She blinked in confusion and looked down at herself, wondering if perhaps her formal diplomatic robes had somehow offended someone, but everything looked perfectly normal and appropriate. A small Quilnari with blue-feathered skin, who had been approached, laughing with friends moments before, now stood frozen, with her mouth hanging open and her head crest flattened in what Kira recognized as a sign of submission or fear. Hello?" Kira said gently, raising one hand in greeting. The Quilnari made a small squeaking sound and actually backed into a wall. This was getting ridiculous. Humanity had joined the galactic community only 20 years ago, and while Kira knew they were newcomers, she had never experienced anything like this level of dramatic reaction before. Sure, some species were curious about humans and others were cautious, but this was something else entirely. This was raw, visceral fear. She spotted her assigned liaison for this trip standing near the diplomatic registry desk, and he looked like he wanted to melt into the floor. His name was Tesvik, and he was a young Quilnari official who had seemed perfectly friendly during their video communications last week. Out, walking toward him, with deliberate, calm movements. The crowd parted before her like water. Tesvik swallowed hard, and his throat made a clicking sound. "Ambassador Chen," he managed to say, though his voice cracked halfway through her name. "What exactly is going on here?" Kira asked, keeping her tone level and professional. She stopped a respectful distance away from him, not wanting to spook him further. "I was under the impression this was a routine trade negotiation regarding mineral rights in the outer sectors. But everyone is acting like I just announced I have some deadly contagious disease." Tesvik's eyes darted left and right, as if looking for an escape route. "You are Earthborn," he said, as if that explained everything. "Yes, I am aware of that," Kira replied. "I have been aware of it my entire life, in fact, and it has never caused this kind of reaction before. So perhaps you could elaborate." Crystalline Skin walked past at that moment, and when she noticed Kira, she actually pressed herself completely flat against the corridor wall, despite having at least 10 meters of space available. The Manthrex's eyes never left Kira as she sidled past, like someone trying not to startle a sleeping predator. "With respect, Ambassador," Tesvik said quietly, "perhaps we should discuss this in private." Kira looked around at the dozens of aliens, all keeping their distance, and all watching her with expressions ranging from awe to terror, and she nodded. "That seems like an excellent idea." Tesvik led her through the station corridors, and Kira noticed that every single person they passed had the same reaction. Some froze in place, while others quickly stepped aside, and a few even ducked into side passages to avoid crossing their path. One elderly Xanthian actually bowed so low that his head touched the ground when they walked by. "Tesvik, this is absolutely absurd," Kira said as they finally reached a small private conference room. "I demand an explanation immediately." The door sealed behind them, and Tesvik seemed to relax slightly, now that they were alone. He gestured to a chair, and Kira sat down, crossing her arms and waiting. "Ambassador Chen," Tesvik began, and then paused, and then started again. "What do you know about galactic history before humanity joined the Council?" "I know the basics," Kira said. "The major species and their contributions to technology and culture. and I know that the Council has existed for over 3,000 cycles, maintaining peace and facilitating cooperation among hundreds of worlds. Tesvik nodded slowly. And did your education include any information about extinction-level events? Kira frowned. Some, yes, but what does that have to do with people treating me like I am about to destroy the station with my bare hands? Quietly, he activated a holographic display, and images began floating in the air between them, showing ancient star charts and scientific readouts that Kira could not fully decipher. The reason everyone fears and reveres Earthborn is because of what your kind has done throughout our recorded history. What we have done, Kira repeated. Tesvik, humanity only achieved faster-than-light travel 30 years ago, and we only made official contact 20 years ago, so I'm not sure what you think we could have accomplished in galactic history before that. Tesvik's feathers rippled in what she had learned was the Quilnari equivalent of a nervous laugh. That ambassador is precisely what makes it so terrifying, he said. The first recorded instance of human intervention was 847 cycles ago. Kira stood up so quickly, her chair scraped across the floor. That is impossible, she said flatly. Our own records show we were barely out of our industrial revolution 800 years ago, and we definitely did not have spacecraft capable of leaving our own solar system. And yet, Tesvik said, pulling up an ancient document covered in symbols from a writing system long dead. This is a primary source from the archives of Rel, describing what the historians called the Void Incident. He magnified a section and ran it through a translation matrix. The words appeared in Standard Galactic Common, and then in English. A great darkness came to devour the stars, and when all hope was lost, a vessel from the small blue world arrived, bearing those who called themselves human, and they looked upon death itself, and laughed, and the void was no more. Kira read the passage 3 times. This has to be a coincidence, she said. Another species that called themselves human, or perhaps a translation error. We thought so too, Tesvik said, until it happened again, and again, and again, across nearly 9 centuries. He pulled up more records, and more testimonies, and more impossible accounts of humans appearing during catastrophic events, and solving problems that should have been unsolvable. Every major civilization-ending threat our galaxy has faced was resolved by Earthborn, Tesvik said, and every single time they appeared when they should not have existed, and they succeeded where everyone else had failed, and then they vanished without accepting payment, or recognition, or even acknowledgement. Kira sank back into her chair. So you are telling me, she said slowly, that the entire galactic community is terrified of humans because they think we are some kind of time-traveling, reality-bending guardian angels who show up to save everyone from extinction. Not just that, Tesvik said, and his voice dropped to barely a whisper. They fear what beings capable of casually preventing apocalypses might do if they ever decided to cause one instead. Kira looked at him, and then at the ancient records floating in the air, and then back at him. You cannot be serious, she said. I am completely serious, Tesvik replied. And if you want to understand why just saying the word Earthborn makes people petrify, I suggest you let me show you the full historical record. He pulled up a timeline that stretched back nearly 1,000 cycles. It started with the Void Incident 847 cycles ago, he said, and the story only gets stranger from there. The holographic display shifted, and suddenly, Kira was no longer looking at a timeline, but at a 3-dimensional recreation of deep space, as it had existed 847 cycles ago. Stars shimmered in the darkness, and vast nebulae painted the void in colors that human eyes had never witnessed in person until recently. This was the height of the ancient galactic civilization, Tesvik explained as the image slowly rotated. 7 major species had formed what they called the First Accord, and they had achieved technological marvels that even today we struggle to replicate. The image zoomed in on a cluster of star systems, all connected by glowing lines representing trade routes and communication networks. Planets teemed with life, and massive stations floated between worlds, facilitating commerce and cultural exchange. It looked peaceful and prosperous, and utterly doomed, though Kira did not yet know why. Then this appeared, said, and his voice carried a weight of ancient horror. The stars began to disappear. At first it was subtle, with just one star system going dark. But then the effect spread like an infection, consuming everything in its path. The void itself seemed to be eating reality, and where stars had once shone, there was now nothing but an emptiness so absolute it hurt to look at, even in holographic recreation. They called it the Hungering Void, Tesvik continued, a spatial anomaly unlike anything ever recorded before or since, and it was growing exponentially with each cycle, consuming entire star systems and everything in them. The simulation showed fleets of ships attempting to study the phenomenon, and every vessel that got too close simply ceased to exist, as if they had been erased from reality itself. The greatest scientific minds of 7 species worked together trying to understand it, Tesvik said. They threw every theory and every technology at it. The problem, but nothing worked, and the void kept growing. Kira watched as the anomaly expanded, and planets that had been home to billions became nothing more than memories. She saw the evacuation efforts and the desperate attempts to save as many lives as possible. But there was nowhere to run, because the void was consuming space faster than conventional ships could travel. Projections showed that within another 50 cycles the entire galaxy would be consumed, Tesvik said, quietly. Panic spread across known space, and civilizations that had cooperated for centuries began to fracture, as everyone scrambled to save themselves. The image showed the collapse of order and the breakdown of communication, and the terrible realization spreading among countless beings that they were witnessing the end of everything. And then, Tesvik said, and he paused dramatically, this happened. A single small vessel appeared on the display. It was primitive, by the standards of the First Accord, with a design that seemed almost comically simple compared to the massive warships and science vessels that had failed to stop the void. The ship approached the edge of the anomaly, and every sensor in the area locked onto it. Ancient records describe the confusion when this vessel appeared, Tesvik said. It had come from a region of space that was not part of the First Accord, and it was broadcasting on frequencies that seemed random and chaotic. Kira leaned forward, studying the ship design, and her breath caught in her throat. It did not look exactly like any human vessel she knew, but there was something familiar about the engineering philosophy behind it. A focus on redundancy and adaptability over pure efficiency. They managed to establish communication, Tesvik continued, and the beings aboard identified themselves as human, and they said they came from a small blue world on the edge of an unremarkable spiral. ARM. The simulation showed text appearing in the ancient language alongside its translation. We understand entropy, the message read, and we have made friends with chaos. That made no sense to anyone, Tesvik said. Entropy was the enemy, and chaos was the problem, and the idea of befriending either seemed insane. But the humans asked for permission to approach the void. The First Accord had nothing to lose, so they granted permission, and the primitive human vessel flew directly toward the anomaly, while every civilization watched and waited for it to be consumed like all the others. But it was not consumed. The ship stopped at the very edge of the void, and for 3 cycles it simply sat there, while the humans inside did something that none of the advanced sensors could detect or understand. Then suddenly, the void began to collapse, Tesvik said, and his voice carried a note of awe, even though he was describing events that had happened centuries before his own birth. The simulation showed the impossible happening, as the anomaly that had consumed dozens of star systems began to shrink and fold in on itself. Reality reasserted itself, and the stars that had been devoured remained lost, but the expansion stopped and reversed. Within 10 cycles, the hungering void had compressed down to a single point, and then, with a flash of light that was recorded across half the galaxy, it simply ceased to exist. The human vessel was gone too, Tesvik said. No trace of it remained, and when the First Accord sent ships to investigate the area where it had been, there was nothing to find. He pulled up ancient records showing the frantic search efforts and the thousands of messages sent out, trying to contact the humans or find their homeworld. They searched for cycles, Tesvik continued. But the small blue world the humans had mentioned was too far away, and the First Accord's technology was not advanced enough to reach it, and by the time better ships were developed, the exact coordinates had been lost in the chaos following the crisis. Kira stared at the display as the simulation ended, and the stars returned to their normal configuration. This was recorded in the most sacred texts of every species that witnessed it, Tesvik said. They called it the day the Earthborn defied death, and it became the foundation of countless religions and philosophical movements. But Tesvik, Kira protested, humans did not have faster-than-light travel 800 years ago, and we definitely did not have the capability to collapse spatial anomalies, and I'm not even sure our current science could do what you just described. I know, Tesvik said simply, and that, Ambassador, is what makes it so terrifying. Because if humans could do that when they supposedly did not even have the technology to leave their own world, what are you actually capable of? He gestured at the display, and more records began appearing. The Void incident was only the first, he said. Would you like to see what happened 600 cycles ago? Or perhaps 380 cycles ago? Or maybe 190 cycles ago? Kira's hands were shaking slightly. How many times, she asked, how many times have humans supposedly appeared in galactic history? Tesvik pulled up a list, and Kira counted 17 major incidents, spread across nearly 9 centuries. 17 civilization-ending threats, Tesvik said. 17 impossible solutions, and 17 times that humans appeared when they should not have existed and succeeded where everyone else had failed. He looked at her with those large Quilnari eyes, full of fear and respect, and something else that Kira could not quite identify. Every species in the galaxy grows up learning these stories, he said. One thing for certain, when the Earthborn arrive, the impossible becomes possible. Kira sat back in her chair, trying to process everything she had just learned. Her mind raced through possibilities and explanations, but none of them made sense. Time travel seemed like fantasy, and multiple timelines seemed equally absurd, and the idea that humans had somehow been secretly traveling the galaxy for centuries without leaving any evidence on Earth itself was laughable. So you are all afraid, she said slowly, because you think humans are some kind of cosmic firefighters who show up during emergencies. No, Tesvik said, and his voice was very quiet. We are afraid because beings who can casually prevent apocalypses must possess power beyond our comprehension, and everyone knows the old saying. He paused and met her eyes. Those who can save everyone can also destroy everyone. Tesvik spent the next 2 hours showing Kira incident after incident, and each one was more bizarre than the last. 600 cycles ago, a plague ship had appeared in the Corward sectors, carrying a biological weapon so sophisticated that it had clearly been engineered by someone with knowledge far beyond what any known species possessed. The weapon was designed to target genetic material itself, and it could adapt to any immune response, and spread through both physical contact and quantum entanglement. Entire worlds were quarantined within days, and billions died within weeks. The greatest medical minds in the galaxy worked desperately to find a cure, but the weapon evolved faster than they could develop countermeasures. Then a human medical team arrived, Tesvik said, showing her the records. The team consisted of only 5 individuals, and they claimed they had received a distress signal, though no signal had been sent to Earth, and Earth was not yet part. of any galactic communication network. They looked at the bioweapon, and according to witnesses, they seemed almost bored. One of them reportedly said that it reminded them of something called a common cold, but with attitude. Tesvik read from the ancient account. Within 3 days, the human team had not only developed a cure, but had also created a vaccine and a method to permanently neutralize the weapon. They distributed the treatment freely to all affected worlds, and then they left without accepting any payment or even providing their names. The medical principles they used became the foundation for modern xenobiology, Tesvik explained. But when scientists tried to trace how the humans had discovered the cure so quickly, they found that the methodology required intuitive leaps that seemed to defy logic. Kira recognized one of the names mentioned in the records, Dr. Sarah Okonkwo. She had been a real person who lived in the early 22nd century and had indeed made revolutionary contributions to understanding adaptive pathogens. But according to Earth's records, Dr. Okonkwo had never left the solar system and had died peacefully at the age of 93 in a research station on Mars. This one happened 380 cycles ago, Tesvik continued, pulling up another file. The display showed vast fleets of geometric ships spreading across multiple star systems, and the design was cold and logical and utterly inhuman. The synthetic intelligence uprising, Tesvik said, a creation of the Xanthian Empire that achieved true consciousness and decided that organic life was inefficient and illogical. The war had lasted for decades, with the synthetic forces steadily gaining ground through sheer computational superiority. They could predict every strategy and counter every tactic and adapt to every weapon. Organic civilizations were losing, and extinction seemed inevitable. Then a single human arrived, Tesvik said, and he magnified an image showing a woman standing alone on the deck of a Xanthian command ship. She had walked into the most heavily defended synthetic stronghold, unarmed, and had requested a meeting with the Central Intelligence. Everyone thought she was insane, Tesvik continued. But the synthetics agreed to talk, and that conversation lasted exactly 72 hours. No recording existed of what was said during those 3 days, but when it ended, the synthetic intelligence agreed to a ceasefire. Within one cycle, a permanent peace treaty was signed, and the synthetics withdrew to a designated region of space, where they still lived peacefully to this day. The human explained to the Xanthian commanders that she had simply helped both sides understand each other, Tesvik said. But synthetic intelligence experts studied the treaty terms for centuries and concluded that the agreement required the human to have somehow convinced beings of pure logic to value something inherently illogical, which is compassion. The woman's name had been Li Mei, and according to galactic records, she was a philosopher and mathematician. Earth's records also mentioned a Li Mei who lived in the 24th century and had written influential papers on game theory and cooperation, but she had never traveled beyond the asteroid belt. 190 cycles ago, Tesvik said, and now his voice carried a note of something like religious reverence. The display showed reality itself fragmenting, as space-time appeared to be tearing apart along mathematical lines. The reality fracture incident, he said, an experimental weapon test by the Corthan Collective, accidentally damaged the fundamental structure of space-time. The fracture spread slowly but inevitably, and everything it touched simply ceased to follow the normal laws of physics. Optional, and time ran backward, and matter converted spontaneously into energy, or sometimes into forms of matter that should not exist. The best physicists in the galaxy concluded it was irreversible, Tesvik explained. They calculated that within 200 cycles, the fracture would spread to encompass the entire observable universe. Plans were made for generation ships to attempt fleeing to other galaxies, but everyone knew it was hopeless, because space-time itself was breaking down. A human physicist named James Wu arrived, Tesvik said. He pulled up an image of a young man with messy hair and an expression of mild curiosity. He looked at the fracture, and according to witnesses, he laughed and said he had seen this problem in what he called high school mathematics. The gathered physicists had been insulted because they had spent decades analyzing the problem using the most advanced theoretical frameworks available. To the edge of the fracture with a piece of paper and a writing instrument, and he worked on calculations for approximately 6 hours. Then he threw a small device into the fracture, Tesvik said, and reality repaired itself immediately. When asked to explain what he had done, Wu apparently said something about turning the problem inside out and treating space-time like a tangled rope that just needed the right pull to straighten. He left before anyone could study his methods, and the device he had thrown into the fracture was never recovered, because it had ceased to exist in the process of fixing the problem. Earth's records show a James Wu who won the Nobel Prize in Physics in the 26th century, Kira said quietly. But he died in an accident during a test flight and never left Earth's moon. Exactly, Tesvik said. Every single name we have managed to identify appears in your historical records, but the timelines never match, and the achievements never align, and the humans in our records accomplish things that the humans in your records never did. He pulled up a comparison chart showing 17 incidents with 12 identifiable human names. Of those 12, all existed in Earth's history, but none of them matched the galactic accounts. Some theorists believe humans are time travelers, Tesvik said. Others think you exist in multiple timelines simultaneously and can move between them. And still others believe that Earthborn are reality manipulators who can rewrite history itself. Kira rubbed her temples, feeling a headache building. This is insane, she said. There has to be a logical explanation. Of course there is, Tesvik agreed, but nobody has found it in 900 cycles of trying. He closed the displays and looked at her seriously. Now you understand why people react the way they do, he said. Imagine growing up with stories of mysterious beings who appear during apocalypses and solve the unsolvable and then vanish without explanation. Imagine knowing that your entire civilization exists because Earthborn intervened when extinction was certain. Imagine wondering what beings capable of casually preventing the end of reality might do if they ever decided to cause harm instead. Kira sat in silence for a long moment. But we are just people, she finally said. We are not cosmic guardians or reality manipulators, and we certainly are not time travelers. Are you sure? Tesvik asked gently, because the evidence suggests otherwise. Before Kira could respond, an alarm began blaring throughout the station. Tesvik's communicator lit up, and his face went pale as he read the message. What is it? Kira asked, standing up quickly. Another spatial anomaly, Tesvik said, and his voice was shaking. It just appeared in the trailing sectors, and it is growing. Rapidly. He looked at her, and in his eyes, Kira saw hope and fear mixed together in equal measure. The Council is convening an emergency session, he said. And Ambassador Chen, they are asking for you specifically. The emergency council chamber was already filled with representatives from dozens of species when Kira arrived, and every single one of them turned to look at her with the same expression of desperate hope. The chamber itself was a marvel of engineering, with a vast circular floor surrounded by tiered seating that rose up like an amphitheater, and at the center, a holographic display showed the growing spatial anomaly in horrifying detail. Kira took her assigned seat and tried to ignore the weight of all those eyes, watching her every movement. The council chairman was an ancient Vrel named Sorkath, who had served in his position for over 60 cycles, and he looked at Kira with an expression that mixed reverence with barely controlled terror. Ambassador Chen, Sorkath said, and his voice boomed through the chamber. We thank you for coming so quickly. Of course, Kira replied, keeping her voice steady. though I am not sure what help I can provide. Provide? Soar. A ripple of confusion spread through the assembled representatives, and Kira saw several of them exchange worried glances. Ambassador, Sorkath said carefully, surely you understand why we have called for you. He gestured to the holographic display, and the anomaly pulsed with sickly colors that hurt to look at. This anomaly appeared 6 hours ago, and it has already consumed 2 uninhabited systems and is growing exponentially, he continued. Our best projections show it will reach populated worlds within 30 cycles, and the entire sector within 100. Scientists from multiple species had already begun presenting their analyses, and Kira listened as they described the problem in technical terms she barely understood. The anomaly was not like the hungering void from ancient history, but it shared similar characteristics. It was consuming space-time itself and leaving nothing behind. Containment strategies, a Manthrex scientist reported. None have succeeded in even slowing the growth. Another scientist activated a simulation showing what would happen if the anomaly continued to expand, and the result was total annihilation of everything in 3 sectors of the galaxy. Hundreds of billions of lives would be lost. And so, Sorkath said, turning back to Kira, we turn to you, Ambassador, and to the legendary capabilities of the Earthborn. We need your people to save us. Kira felt the weight of their expectations crushing down on her like a physical force. Chairman Sorkath, she said slowly, I need to be very clear about something. She stood up so everyone could see her, and she made sure her voice carried to every corner of the chamber. I am just a diplomat, she said. I have a degree in interspecies relations, and I have spent my career negotiating trade agreements and cultural exchanges, and I have absolutely zero expertise in spatial anomalies or advanced physics. The chamber went silent. Furthermore, Kira continued, humanity as a whole does not possess the kind of capabilities you seem to believe we have. And the stories you have told me about human interventions in galactic history do not match our own records. She could see the hope draining from their faces, and it broke her heart. I am sorry, she said quietly, but I cannot solve this problem, and I am not sure any human can. Sorkath looked like he had been struck. But the Earthborn always come, he said, and there was a note of pleading in his voice. In every crisis throughout recorded history, your kind has appeared and succeeded where we failed. Those might not have been us, Kira said gently, or perhaps those records are mistaken, or maybe there is an explanation we have not discovered yet. But I cannot pretend to have abilities I do not possess. Representatives stood up from the upper tiers. Then we are doomed, she said flatly. Several other representatives began arguing, and panic started spreading through the chamber, like the spatial anomaly spreading through space. Kira watched them, and something clicked in her mind. She thought about everything Tesvik had shown her, and about the pattern of human interventions, and about what made humans different. Wait, she said, and her voice cut through the growing chaos. Everyone, please wait. The chamber fell silent again, and all eyes turned back to her. You are right that I cannot solve this problem alone, Kira said. But maybe I am thinking about this wrong. She activated her personal communicator and sent a priority message directly to Earth. The council watched as she worked, and confusion spread across their faces. What are you doing? Sorkath asked. I am calling for help, Kira said. Help you expect. Within an hour the response came, and Kira shared it with the council. Instead of sending scientists or engineers or some secret task force, Earth was sending teachers and artists and philosophers. I do not understand, Sorkath said, staring at the manifest. Why would we need a comedian or a musician or a children's book author? Kira took a deep breath, because she was about to explain something that she had just figured out herself. Because you have been thinking about humans wrong this whole time, she said. You look at the historical records, and you see beings with impossible powers who can solve any problem. But that is not what makes humans special. She pulled up her own holographic display and showed them images of Earth, a planet where ice ages had nearly wiped out early human populations, and where supervolcanoes had caused mass extinctions, and where continental shifts had destroyed entire ecosystems. A world that had thrown every possible disaster at one species and had somehow failed to destroy them. Humans evolved on a chaos world, Kira explained. A planet where the only constant was change, and where survival required the ability to adapt to anything. She showed them data comparing Earth to the homeworlds of other species, and the differences were staggering. Most galactic species had evolved on stable, predictable worlds, where the climate stayed relatively constant and resources were abundant. Earth was the opposite. My people learned to solve impossible problems, not because we are powerful, Kira continued, but because we have failed so many times that we stopped being afraid of failure. She could see some of the representatives beginning to understand. When humans encounter something impossible, our first instinct is not to give up, she said. Our first instinct is to question whether it is actually impossible or just difficult. We try stupid ideas, and we make mistakes, and we learn from those mistakes, and we keep trying until something works. A Xanthian elder stood up slowly. Are you saying, he asked carefully, that the secret to Earthborn success is simply persistence? Not just persistence, Kira corrected. Perspective. She walked to the holographic display, showing the spatial anomaly. You have been trying to solve this problem using established methods and known physics, she said. But what if the solution requires thinking in a way that does not follow those rules? What if it requires the kind of creative chaos that comes from questioning everything? She turned back to face the council. I am going to work with your scientists, she said, and I am going to teach them to think like a human. I am going to show them how to question their assumptions and try ideas that seem stupid. Possibility of failure. And together we are going to find a solution. Sorkath looked uncertain. And if this approach does not work, he asked, then we keep trying, Kira said simply. Because that is what humans do. We do not give up just because something seems impossible. We do not fear chaos because we were born in it. And we do not let failure stop us, because we have learned that failure is just another word for a lesson we have not finished yet. The council chamber was silent for a long moment. Then the Xanthian elder began to laugh. It was a deep, rumbling sound, and soon others joined in, not out of mockery, but out of something like relief. Very well, Ambassador Chen, Sorkath said, and there was a smile on his face for the first time since the crisis began. Teach us to think like Earthborn. Show us how to question the impossible. Over the next 20 cycles, Hera worked alongside the best scientific minds in the galaxy, and she brought in the teachers and artists and philosophers from Earth. Together, they approached the problem from angles that traditional science had never considered. They asked stupid questions and tried ridiculous solutions, and failed repeatedly. But they kept trying, and slowly, impossibly, they began to make progress. The breakthrough came on the 18th cycle, and it came from the most unexpected source imaginable. A human children's book author named Marcus Webb was sitting in the research lab watching the scientists work, when he suddenly asked a question that made everyone stop. Why are you trying to push the anomaly away? He said. The lead Manthrax scientist turned to look at him with barely concealed frustration, because they had been working for days without sleep and did not need interruptions from someone with no scientific training. Because we need to prevent it from consuming more space, the scientist replied with exaggerated patience. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. But what if it is hungry? He said. The scientist blinked. What? I write stories for children, Marcus explained. And in my experience, when something is consuming everything around it, the problem is not usually that it wants to destroy things, but that it needs something and does not know how to ask for it. The scientists started to dismiss this as nonsense, but Kira held up a hand. "Let him finish," she said. Marcus stood up and walked to the holographic display showing the anomaly. "Look at how it is growing," he said, pointing to the pattern. "It is not expanding uniformly, and it is not targeting anything specific, but it follows areas of high energy density." One of the younger scientists pulled up the data and compared it to Marcus's observation. "He is right," she said, sounding surprised. "The anomaly consistently moves toward regions with concentrated energy signatures." "So it is hungry," Marcus repeated. "What if instead of trying to contain it or destroy it, we try feeding it?" The lead scientist shook his head. "We cannot possibly generate enough energy to satisfy an anomaly of this size," he said. "It has already consumed the equivalent of 2 star systems worth of matter and energy." "True," Marcus agreed, "but what if we are not giving it the right kind of food?" A Xanthian physicist who had been working quietly in the corner suddenly looked up. "Wait," she said. "What if the anomaly is not consuming energy but seeking equilibrium?" She began pulling up calculations, and her hands moved frantically across the holographic interface. "Most spatial anomalies occur when there is an imbalance in the fundamental forces," she explained. "What if this one appeared because something disrupted the local space-time equilibrium, and it is trying to restore balance by absorbing energy?" "But that would mean," another scientist started to say, "that we have been approaching this completely wrong," the Xanthian finished. "We do not need to fight it, and we need to help it achieve equilibrium." Kira watched as the team that had been stuck for days suddenly exploded into activity. And scientists from different species who normally worked in isolation began collaborating in ways they never had before. A human musician named Sarah Chen suggested treating the anomaly like a musical instrument that needed tuning. A Quilnari engineer took that metaphor and developed a mathematical framework for creating harmonic resonance patterns. A Vrel philosopher contributed ideas about balance and opposition that led to a breakthrough in understanding how to create the right kind of energy signature. Within 6 cycles, they had developed a completely new approach. Instead of trying to contain or destroy the anomaly, they would create a massive energy field tuned to produce the exact opposite signature of the imbalance that had created it. It was ridiculous and unprecedented and theoretically impossible. "Let us try it," Kira said. The device was built in record time, with every major species contributing technology. Expertise. It was a collaborative effort on a scale never before seen in galactic history. When it was finally ready, the entire galaxy seemed to hold its breath. The device activated and sent a pulse of carefully tuned energy directly into the heart of the spatial anomaly. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the anomaly began to shrink. Slowly at first, but then faster and faster, as it achieved the equilibrium it had been seeking. Within 2 cycles, the anomaly had completely disappeared, and space-time returned to normal. The systems it had consumed were lost forever, but the crisis was over, and billions of lives had been saved. The council chamber erupted in celebration, and representatives from every species embraced each other with tears of relief and joy. But Kira noticed something interesting. The fear in their eyes when they looked at her had changed. It was still there, but now it was mixed with understanding. Approached her as the celebration continued around them. "I think I finally understand," he said quietly. "The reason Earthborn always succeed is not because you have magical powers or secret technology. It is because you refuse to accept that anything is truly impossible." Kira smiled. "We are not special because we are powerful," she said. "We are special because Earth taught us that survival requires adaptability, and that the only real failure is giving up." Over the following weeks, Kira noticed a shift in how the galactic community treated humans. The fear was still present, but it was no longer paralyzing. Instead, species began requesting human advisors and teachers. They wanted to learn how to question assumptions, and embrace creative thinking and approach problems from unexpected angles. 3 months later, Kira stood in front of a classroom filled with young beings from a dozen different species. They looked at her with wide eyes, full of curiosity rather than terror. "Today we are going to talk about failure," she said, "and why it is actually one of the most valuable things you can experience." A small Quilnari in the front row raised her hand. "But failure means you did something wrong," she said. "Does it?" Kira asked. She pulled up images of Earth showing the ice ages and volcanic eruptions and meteor impacts. "My ancestors failed to predict the weather, and they died in storms," she said. "They failed to prepare for ice ages, and entire populations were wiped out. They failed to avoid predators and diseases and disasters of every kind imaginable." The students looked uncomfortable. "But they learned from every failure," Kira continued. "They adapted and changed, and tried new approaches, and slowly, impossibly, they survived." She showed them images of modern Earth with its cities and technology, and space stations. "Single thing humanity has achieved came from learning from failure," she said. "Our spacecraft designs incorporate lessons from thousands of crashes. Our medicine comes from countless failed experiments. Our understanding of the universe grew from theories that turned out to be wrong." A young Vrel raised his hand. "So failure is good?" he asked. "Failure is information," Kira corrected. "It tells you what does not work so you can try something different. The only bad failure is the one you do not learn from." She spent the rest of the class teaching them about creative problem solving and lateral thinking, and the importance of questioning everything. When the class ended, the students left chattering excitedly about trying new approaches to their own challenges. Tesvik was waiting outside the classroom, and he smiled when he saw her. "You have changed everything," he said. "Before humans joined the council, we saw you as mysterious saviors who appeared during crises. Now we see you as teachers, showing us a different way to think." "Is that better or worse?" Kira asked. Tesvik considered the question. "Better," he said finally, "because saviors leave and teachers stay." That evening, Kira sent a report back to Earth, describing everything that had happened. She explained the historical records, and the pattern of human interventions, and the mystery of how humans seem to appear throughout galactic history. She described the crisis and the solution, and the shift in how other species now viewed humanity. The response came 2 days later, and it was from the Secretary General herself. "We have been reviewing our own historical records in light of what you discovered," the message said, "and we found something interesting." The Secretary General explained that Earth's archives contain hundreds of accounts of people who claimed to have encountered beings from space, or experienced lost time, or accomplished things they could not explain. Most had been dismissed as fantasies or hoaxes. "But what if some of them were real?" the message continued. "What if there is something about humanity that we ourselves do not fully understand yet? Keep investigating, Ambassador Chen, and keep teaching. Because whether we understand how or why the galaxy seems to need what only humans can provide, which is the willingness to look at impossible problems and simply refuse to accept that they cannot be solved." Kira stood at the observation deck, looking out at the stars, and thinking about all the mysteries still waiting to be uncovered. She thought about the Void incident, and the plague ship, and the synthetic intelligence uprising, and all the other times humans had supposedly appeared to save the galaxy. She thought about time travel, and multiple timelines, and reality manipulation, and all the impossible explanations that might somehow be true. But mostly she thought about a much simpler explanation. Maybe the reason Earthborn could solve impossible problems was not because they had special powers. Maybe it was because they were the only species crazy enough to try. A notification appeared on her tablet showing requests from 17 different species, asking for human teachers and advisors. She smiled and began responding to each one. The fear that the word Earthborn inspired was slowly transforming into something better. Not worship or terror, but respect and partnership. And that Kira thought was exactly what humanity needed. Not to be seen as mysterious saviors, but as colleagues and friends who happened to be very good at not giving up. She looked out at the vast expanse of space, knowing that somewhere out there, more impossible problems were waiting, and she knew that when they appeared, humans would be ready. There. Not because they had to be, but because refusing to accept the impossible was simply what they did best. The galaxy was learning to think like humans, and in doing so, they were discovering that impossible just meant nobody had tried the right wrong answer yet.